The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban streets as an FBI agent finished up a meeting with his informant. He'd been working on a major case for months, and today's meeting had finally given him the breakthrough he needed. Dressed in a crisp navy suit and driving his government-issued black sedan, he felt satisfied with the progress made. But something caught his attention in the rearview mirror. A police cruiser had been following him for the past few blocks. The agent checked his speedometer, exactly at the speed limit. He double-checked his turn signals, making sure to use them at every corner. Still, the patrol car stayed right behind him, close enough that he could make out the officer's silhouette in his mirror. Here we go again, he thought to himself, having experienced similar situations before. Even after 15 years as a federal agent, some things hadn't changed. He noticed how the police car would get uncomfortably close, then back off, as if trying to provoke a reaction. The agent kept his cool, maintaining his speed, and following every traffic rule to the letter. Looking around, he noticed how the neighborhood had changed from the busy commercial area where he'd met his informant to a quieter residential zone. Well-maintained houses lined both sides of the street, and a few people were out walking their dogs or pushing strollers. Some stopped to watch the unusual sight of a patrol car seemingly stalking another vehicle. The agent reached for his credentials, already knowing they'd be needed. He'd been through this drill before, too many times to count. His dashboard camera was running, as it always did during working hours. Years of experience had taught him to document everything. The police cruiser's lights suddenly flashed to life, painting the street in rotating blue patterns. The agent calmly put on his turn signal and pulled over to the curb, positioning his car perfectly parallel to the sidewalk. As he waited, he could see the officer in his side mirror, taking an unusually long time to exit his vehicle. The agent kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, his FBI badge already placed on the dashboard. Through his open window, he could hear kids playing basketball a few houses down, their game momentarily paused as they watched the scene unfold. A couple walking their golden retriever had stopped too, trying not to make it obvious they were watching. The whole street seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The agent took a deep breath, knowing from the officer's body language as he approached that this wasn't going to be a typical traffic stop. He'd seen that particular walk before, the exaggerated swagger, the hand resting too casually on the holster. Everything about it screamed trouble. His years of training kicked in as he mentally prepared for what was coming. He started his usual calming technique, counting his breaths, keeping his heart rate steady. The temperature was perfect for an early fall day, but he could feel sweat starting to form on his forehead. Not from fear, but from the frustration of knowing exactly how this scene was about to play out. As footsteps approached his car door, the agent glanced one last time at his credentials on the dashboard. The next few minutes would either end quickly with a professional apology, or they'd become another story he'd have to tell during department sensitivity training. Either way, he was ready. The officer rapped his knuckles against the car window, even though it was already rolled down. "License and registration," he barked, not even bothering with the usual greeting. His nameplate caught the afternoon sun as he leaned down, trying to intimidate with his presence. "Good afternoon, officer," the FBI agent replied calmly, careful to keep his hands where they could be seen. "Before I reach for anything, I want to inform you that I'm a federal agent." He spoke clearly and professionally, the way he'd been trained, the way he'd taught others to speak in similar situations. The officer's face twisted into a sneer. "Sure you are, and I'm the president. Let's try this again. License and registration." His hand rested heavily on his holster, a gesture that wasn't lost on the growing number of onlookers gathering on their front lawns. The agent felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice steady. "Sir, my credentials are on the dashboard right in front of you. I'm happy to cooperate, but I want you to be aware of my status before we proceed." He could feel his heart beating faster, not from fear, but from the familiar surge of controlled anger he'd learned to manage over the years. A child's bicycle bell rang somewhere down the street, followed by a parent's urgent whisper to come inside. The agent noticed how the neighborhood had gone quiet, like nature holding its breath before a storm. Even the birds seemed to have stopped chirping. "Step out of the vehicle," the officer commanded, taking a step back and widening his stance. His voice had grown louder, more theatrical, as if performing for his audience of concerned residents. Now. The agent took a slow, deep breath. "Officer, I want to cooperate, but I need you to acknowledge that you see my federal credentials on the dashboard. They're right there, clearly visible." He kept his tone professional, knowing his dash cam was recording every word, every gesture. I said, "Step out." The officer's voice cracked slightly, betraying his growing frustration. "This is your final warning." His right hand had moved from resting on his holster to gripping it, a supple but significant escalation that made several onlookers gasp. Time seemed to slow down. The agent could hear the rustle of leaves in the autumn breeze, the distant sound of a lawnmower, the murmur of concerned neighbors. He thought about his training, about the countless times he'd been in similar situations, about the younger agents he mentored, teaching them how to handle moments exactly like this. "I'm going to open my door very slowly," the agent announced, his voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. "I want to cooperate fully, but I need you to understand that I'm a federal agent, and this stop appears to be without cause." He emphasized each word, speaking not just to the officer, but to his dash cam, to the witnesses, to the eventual review board that he knew would be watching this footage. As he carefully opened his door, he could see the officer's boots step back, could hear the crunch of gravel under them. The leather of his car seat creaked as he began to rise, his movements deliberate and telegraphed. In his peripheral vision, he noticed phones being raised, recording the scene from various angles. The autumn air felt cool against his face as he stood up, his suit jacket pulling slightly tight across his shoulders. He kept his hands raised to shoulder height, palms forward, in the universal gesture of compliance. The position was familiar, both from his training as an agent and from too many similar encounters over the years. "Turn around," hands on the vehicle. The officer's voice had taken on an edge of desperation now, as if he was starting to realize he might have misread the situation, but was too committed to back down. The agent complied, feeling the warm metal of his car hood under his palms, the position undignified but necessary to avoid escalation. Behind him, he could hear more vehicles approaching, backup, no doubt, called in by an officer who had decided to turn a routine stop into a confrontation. The agent closed his eyes briefly, knowing that what happened in the next few minutes would either end careers or change them forever. The screech of tires announced the arrival of 2 more patrol cars, their lights painting the peaceful suburban street in flashing red and blue. The FBI agent remained still, hands placed firmly on his car's hood, counting his breaths to stay calm. He'd been in worse situations, but this one felt different, more personal, more frustrating. A woman walking her dog across the street had stopped to record everything on her phone. The agent could hear her voice, low but clear, describing the scene to someone on a call. "They've got him against his car. Yes, he's in a suit. No, he hasn't done anything." The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the street as 4 more officers approached, their footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. The first officer, still maintaining his aggressive stance, began briefing his colleagues. Subject was uncooperative, refused to comply with simple commands. The agent spoke up, his voice steady and clear enough to carry to the growing crowd of witnesses. "I've been completely cooperative. I informed you of my status as a federal agent, and my credentials are clearly visible on the dashboard. This stop was made without probable cause." One of the newly arrived officers, hand resting on his holster, circled around to the passenger side of the agent's car. The agent could hear him let out a low whistle. "Hey, we might have a situation here," he called out, his voice carrying a note of concern as he spotted the FBI credentials. But the first officer wasn't backing down. He could be faking it. Those badges can be bought online these days. His voice carried a desperate edge now, the tone of someone who knew they'd made a mistake but couldn't find a way to back down gracefully. The autumn wind picked up, sending leaves skittering across the pavement. More neighbors had gathered on their porches and lawns, their murmurs growing louder with each passing moment. A school bus stopped at the corner, and the driver quickly decided to take an alternate route, not wanting to expose the children to the tense scene. "My badge number and credentials can be verified with 1 phone call," the agent said, maintaining his professional tone. "My dashboard camera is recording this entire interaction. I suggest we all take a step back and handle this properly." One of the new officers, older than the others, stepped forward. "Maybe we should run his credentials first," he suggested, his tone carrying years of experience. But before he could take charge of the situation, the first officer made his move. The cold metal of handcuffs pressed against the agent's wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began, his voice shaking slightly. The agent could feel the tremor in the officer's hands, not from fear, but from adrenaline, and perhaps the dawning realization that this situation had spiraled far beyond a simple traffic stop. Phones recorded from every angle now, their owners knowing they were witnessing something significant. The agent could hear someone in the crowd saying, "This isn't right," while another voice called out, "I'm sending this to the news." The older officer stepped closer, trying to get a better look at the credentials on the dashboard. His sharp intake of breath was audible in the tense silence. The agent could tell from that sound alone that his credentials had finally been properly seen, but it was too late. The handcuffs were already clicking shut. The agent remained composed, knowing that every word and action would be scrutinized later. "Officer," he said clearly, ensuring the dash cam would pick up every word, "you are currently attempting to detain a federal agent without cause. I'm requesting your supervisor's presence immediately. This has gone far enough." A rush of wind sent more leaves dancing across the scene, nature's quiet reminder that the world continued turning even as careers and lives hung in the balance of the next few moments. The agent could feel the cool metal against his wrists, the eyes of the crowd on his back, and the weight of yet another moment that would become part of a larger conversation about law enforcement and society. The breaking point came with the sound of approaching sirens. The FBI agent stood handcuffed beside his vehicle, watching as a third wave of police cars entered the street. His shoulders were starting to ache from the awkward position, but his voice remained steady and clear as crystal. "This is your final opportunity to make this right," the agent announced, loud enough for all the recording phones to catch his words. "I am a federal agent conducting official business. You've ignored my credentials, refused to verify my identity, and are now illegally detaining me. Call your supervisor immediately." The first officer's face had turned a shade paler, but his stubbornness remained. "Stop resisting," he barked, though the agent hadn't moved an inch. The words rang hollow in the autumn air, spoken more for the benefit of the recordings than any actual resistance. A gentle breeze carried the whispers of the gathered crowd. "He's FBI," someone muttered. "Look at his car, it's definitely government issued," another voice added. The murmurs grew louder, more concerned, as phones continued recording every moment. The agent took a deep breath, his training kicking in as he prepared for what needed to be done. "I want everyone listening to understand exactly what's happening here." He projected his voice with the authority of his 15 years of service. "My name is Special Agent in charge of the local FBI field office. My credentials are on my dashboard. I'm currently being detained without cause, and my dash cam is recording everything." The effect was immediate. Two of the newer officers exchanged worried glances. The older officer who had tried to intervene earlier stepped forward again, this time with more urgency. "We need to verify those credentials right now," he insisted, moving toward the car. But the first officer wasn't done. His hand trembling slightly, he reached for his radio. "Dispatch, subject is claiming to be FBI, probably fake credentials, requesting additional units." His voice cracked on the last word, betraying his growing uncertainty. The agent shifted slightly, wincing as the handcuffs dug into his wrists. "Officer, I need you to listen carefully," he said, his tone switching from professional to intensely serious. "Every second you continue this illegal detention makes things worse. You have my credentials right there. You have the ability to verify my identity with one phone call. Your dash cam, my dash cam, and about 20 civilian phones are recording this entire incident. Make the right choice." A young girl on her porch turned to her mother, asking loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Mom, why are they arresting the FBI man?" The innocent question seemed to hang in the air, making several officers shift uncomfortably. The older officer had finally reached the dashboard, picking up the credentials with careful hands. His face went through a series of emotions: concern, shock, and finally alarm. "These are real," he announced, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to drop like a stone in the quiet street. "These are absolutely real." The first officer's radio crackled to life. Unit 247, be advised, supervisor is en route to your location. Hold your position. The message seemed to echo off the surrounding houses, marking a point of no return. The agent stood straighter, despite the discomfort. I'll make this simple, he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority that made everyone listen. Remove these handcuffs, step back, and wait for your supervisor. Every minute you delay is another minute this incident will be reviewed in detail by both our departments. The choice is yours. The crowd had grown larger, their phones still recording, capturing what everyone now realized was a career-ending mistake in progress. The sound of more sirens approached in the distance, bringing with them the weight of consequences that would change more than just one officer's future. The police sergeant's arrival changed everything. His SUV pulled up with lights flashing but no siren, the quiet of his approach somehow more commanding than any noise could have been. The crowd parted automatically, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Even the autumn leaves seemed to still their dancing in the breeze. As the sergeant stepped out of his vehicle, his face already showed concern. 25 years on the force had taught him to read situations quickly, and this one was screaming trouble. He took in the handcuffed man in the expensive suit, the growing crowd with their phones raised, and his officer's tense postures. The first officer started speaking rapidly. "Sarge, this suspect was uncooperative and..." But the sergeant's raised hand cut him off mid-sentence. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. "Someone want to explain why there's a handcuffed federal agent on my street?" The sergeant asked, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made everyone straighten up. He'd already spotted the government plates on the sedan and the FBI credentials that the older officer was still holding. The first officer's face drained of color. "Sir, he claimed to be FBI, but I thought..." "You thought?" The sergeant's voice could have frozen water. "Those credentials were in plain view on his dashboard. Did you even look at them?" The agent remained silent, letting the scene unfold. His wrists were aching, but he knew this moment would have consequences far beyond his temporary discomfort. Around them, the crowd had grown eerily quiet, everyone sensing they were witnessing something significant. The sergeant walked over to examine the credentials himself, though it was merely a formality now. His eyes widened slightly as he read them. "Special agent in charge," he muttered, shaking his head. The implications were sinking in. They hadn't just detained any FBI agent, but the head of the local field office. "Get those cuffs off him. Now." The sergeant's command cracked like a whip through the tension. The first officer fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly that the older officer had to step in and help. As the handcuffs came off, the agent rolled his shoulders slowly, working out the stiffness. A young officer hurriedly offered him a bottle of water, which he accepted with a nod. The small gesture of humanity seemed to highlight how unnecessary the entire confrontation had been. The sergeant stepped forward, his face a mask of professional concern. "Sir, I cannot begin to express my apologies for this incident. I assure you this will be dealt with immediately." His words carried the weight of knowing this would have serious repercussions for his department. The agent took a slow sip of water before responding. "Sergeant, I appreciate your professionalism. I'll need a copy of all bodycam footage, dash cam recordings, and the names of all officers involved." His voice was calm but carried an authority that made several officers wince. A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the first hints of evening coolness. The crowd was still recording, but their whispers had taken on a different tone now, one of disbelief at what they'd witnessed. Parents were already on phones, spreading the story. Local news vans would arrive soon. The sergeant turned to his officers, his expression grim. "I want every piece of footage preserved. Full reports on my desk tonight." Then, more quietly to the first officer, "Turn in your badge and gun. You're on immediate administrative leave pending investigation." Word spread through the police department like wildfire. By sunset, every officer in the precinct had heard about the incident. The chief of police sat in his office, rubbing his temples as he watched the viral videos already spreading across social media. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since the first clip hit the internet. The FBI agent's dashcam footage arrived on the chief's desk within the hour. The video was damning, showing every moment of the baseless stop, the ignored credentials, the escalation that never should have happened. The chief watched it 3 times, each viewing making his stomach sink further. Down in the briefing room, officers gathered in small groups, their voices hushed as they discussed what happened. "Did you hear? The guy they arrested was the FBI special agent in charge," one whispered. 15 years of service, multiple commendations, another added. The mood was tense, everyone knowing this would have lasting consequences. Local news vans lined up outside the police station, their satellite dishes reaching into the darkening sky like metal trees. Reporters stood in front of bright camera lights, their voices carrying the urgency of breaking news. In a shocking incident of apparent racial profiling, local police arrested an FBI agent. Inside her office, the internal affairs investigator was already reviewing the footage. Her notepad filled quickly as she documented every violation, every ignored protocol, every moment the situation could have been de-escalated. The stack of witness statements on her desk grew taller by the hour as more neighborhood residents came forward. The police union representative paced in the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear. "No, we can't spin this," he said firmly to someone on the other end. "The dash cam footage is clear. We need to handle this right, or we'll lose all credibility." In the community relations office, the phone rang constantly. Concerned citizens, community leaders, and civil rights organizations all wanted answers. The young officer manning the phone struggled to keep up, repeating the same careful response. "We take this incident very seriously and are conducting a thorough investigation." The FBI field office was surprisingly calm in comparison. The agent sat in his office, typing his official report with methodical precision. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from other agents and law enforcement officials across the country, all expressing support and sharing similar experiences. As evening fell, the chief of police called an emergency meeting with his command staff. The conference room lights cast long shadows as they reviewed the evidence. "This stops now," the chief declared, his voice firm. "We're going to use this as a catalyst for change. Complete overhaul of traffic stop protocols, mandatory bias training, everything." Outside, the city continued its normal rhythm, but something had shifted. On social media, the videos racked up millions of views. In homes across the city, families discussed what they'd seen. Parents used it as a teaching moment, community leaders planned responses, and citizens demanded accountability. The agent's phone lit up with a message from his supervisor in Washington. "How do you want to handle this?" it read. The agent looked out his office window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. He'd already decided. This incident wouldn't just be another statistic. It would become a turning point, a case study in what needed to change. 3 months after the incident, the changes were already visible. The police department's training room was packed with officers attending a new mandatory course on bias awareness. At the front of the room stood the FBI agent, now a regular guest speaker, sharing his experience not with anger, but with hope for change. "It could have ended differently," he told the room of attentive officers. "But instead of filing lawsuits or demanding resignations, I chose to be part of the solution." His words carried weight, drawing nods from even the most skeptical veterans in the room. The first officer's termination had been swift and decisive. The police chief made it clear. This wasn't just about one incident, but about changing an entire culture. The department's new training program became a model for other cities, with departments across the country requesting guidance on implementing similar changes. In the community, something remarkable was happening. The local coffee shop hosted weekly discussions between officers and residents. Young officers paired with community leaders for ride-alongs, learning about the neighborhoods they served. Trust was being rebuilt, one conversation at a time. The dash cam footage became a teaching tool in police academies nationwide. Instructors used it to show how quickly situations could escalate and how easily they could be prevented. "Look at the missed opportunities for de-escalation," they would point out. "Notice how credentials were ignored due to preconceptions." The FBI agent's phone rang one morning with an unexpected call. A national police training organization wanted him to help develop new guidelines for traffic stops. "Your experience," they said, "could prevent this from happening to someone else." He accepted without hesitation. Local schools invited police officers to speak with students, not about law and order, but about understanding and respect. The conversations were honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but always productive. Children asked questions adults were often afraid to ask, and officers answered with newfound candor. 6 months later, the department's statistics told a story of change. Traffic stop complaints had dropped significantly. Community satisfaction ratings rose. Officers reported feeling better equipped to handle diverse situations. The transformation wasn't perfect, but it was real and measurable. The officer who made the initial stop that day found a new career in corporate security, but not before writing a public letter of apology that went viral for its honesty. "I let bias cloud my judgment," he wrote. "I'm sharing my story so others can learn from my mistakes." 1 year after the incident, the FBI agent stood at a podium, accepting an award for his contributions to law enforcement reform. In his speech, he spoke about turning points. "Sometimes," he said, "the worst moments become catalysts for the best changes. What matters isn't that these incidents happen, but how we choose to respond to them." The changes spread beyond one department, beyond one city. Other agencies began examining their own practices, implementing similar reforms. What started as one officer's mistake became a movement for positive change in law enforcement across the country.